Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling one of the greatest paradoxes of our hyper-digital, really secular age.
It's a big one.
It really is. I mean, look around you. We live in a world that is just driven by AI, by quantum leaps in physics, by this rapid-fire global communication.
Right. Everything is new. Everything is fast.
Exactly. And yet, why do these texts, I mean, we're talking about documents written on parchment and carved into stone millennia ago, why do they still exert this strange, intense, almost gravitational pull on human civilization?
That's a profound question. And I think it persists because we are fundamentally mislabeling those texts. We tend to, confine them to history departments or theology or mythology.
We put them in a box.
We put them in a box. But our extensive analysis suggests something much more compelling and immediate. The core finding we're diving into today is that these sacred texts are not relics. They function at a very practical level as technologies of the soul.
Technologies of the soul, that's a provocative term. What makes them technologies rather than just, say, philosophies or moral codes?
Well, a philosophy might suggest what you should do. A technology provides the operating instructions for how to do it.
Ah, okay, the user manual.
Exactly, the user manual. These texts, the Torah, the Yoga Sutras, the Tao Te Ching, they are sophisticated operating systems. They literally map the complex internal landscape of human consciousness. They provide these deep ethical frameworks, and they guide our navigation of the metaphysical structure of reality.
They're the source code.
They're the source code and the detailed user manual all in one, designed to manage, to debug, and to optimize the messy, complicated business of being human, really, across any era.
I really appreciate that pragmatic angle.
Yeah.
So our mission today is it's explicitly non-dogmatic. We're not here to promote one belief system over another.
Not at all.
Our mission is to analyze the foundational concepts like the blueprint of creation in the Torah, or the technical instruction for the cessation of the mind in yoga, or that profound concept of the way in the Tao, and to translate them. We want to extract the actionable, real-world insights for flourishing that, someone can apply starting tomorrow.
Precisely. We are drawing from an exhaustive, cross-cultural analysis of world scriptures. We're dissecting their foundational structures, their mystical depths, and their historical context to see where they converge. The aim is to distill a unified protocol for human excellence that transcends all those cultural boundaries.
Sure, we're looking for the universal user interface.
That's it, the universal UI, buried beneath all the layers of time and tradition.
All right, let's start at what you could call the foundational bedrock of Western monotheism, the Tanakh, which, for our listeners, is the acronym for the three major sections, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim.
The Hebrew Bible.
Right, and the sources really emphasize that this is a complex library. It delivers its truths through narrative, through detailed law, and through really evocative poetry. It demands active engagement. It's not something you just passively read. It's like a mental universe you have to walk through and wrestle with.
It absolutely is. It is the primary lens through which the entire Abrahamic tradition views reality. And to truly grasp the gravity and the scope of the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, we have to momentarily set aside viewing it merely as a compilation of ancient laws and prohibitions.
We have to zoom out.
We have to zoom way out. We need to internalize the rabbinic tradition's view of its cosmological status.
Let's go there. This is where we shift from viewing the law as just a rule book to seeing it as, I guess, the structural foundation of the universe itself.
Yes. We're talking about a concept preserved in the Midrash, specifically in Midrash Bereshit Rabbah. The concept is istikel boraita ubara alma.
Okay, what does that translate to?
It means God looked into the Torah and created the world.
Wow, that's a staggering claim. That's almost an ontological statement. If the universe was created out of the Torah, what does that practically imply for us living in it?
It means that the legal and ethical structures detailed in the text are not arbitrary divine decrees. And they are certainly not just reactions to human failure after the fact.
So they're not cleaning up a mess.
They're not cleaning up a mess. Instead, they are the universe's original architectural plans. They are the very physics of moral reality. So if morality is built into the physics of the universe, then violating an ethical law doesn't just, incur social punishment. It introduces instability into the cosmic order.
That's the pragmatic implication right there. If you want to understand how reality is built, why, for example, social chaos erupts when justice fails, you study the Torah because it is the schematic for existence. The ethical structures in this framework literally predate the need for ethics.
They are the how and the why things are ordered to maintain equilibrium. It elevates a simple prohibition, say, against theft or bearing false witness, into a mechanism for maintaining cosmic integrity. Just as an architect consults blueprints before laying a foundation, this tradition posits that the divine intellect used the Torah as the schematic for existence itself.
So let's follow this blueprint. Let's look at the narrative arc of consciousness within those 5 books. They seem to map the spiritual development of both a nation and, really, an individual.
Right, they work on both levels. We start with Genesis, or Bereshit. This book establishes the ontological foundations. It moves from that universal creation story and the drama of Adam and Eve to the particular story of the patriarchs.
And the axiom here is?
The axiom establishes that existence is intentional. It's purposeful. It's not accidental. And crucially, the sources highlight Abraham as the original seeker, the archetype of radical faith and Chesed.
Loving kindness.
Loving kindness, yes. And this revolutionary idea that the universe fundamentally responds to moral choices made by conscious agents.
So that sets the moral machinery in motion, which I guess leads directly to Exodus, or Shema, where we move from the family unit to the birth of a nation under immense pressure.
And we enter the dual paradigm of redemption and sanctification. The sources powerfully describe the slavery in Egypt as the iron furnace.
The iron furnace.
It's a metaphor for suffering, used not for pointless cruelty, but to refine and forge a national conscience that's sensitive to oppression and suffering. The liberation is only half the story, though. It's redemption from slavery, followed by sanctification for a purpose.
And that purpose is centered around the construction of the Mishkan, right, the tabernacle.
Exactly, the mobile sanctuary.
So what does the Mishkan teach us about sanctification? It's this very detailed, almost obsessive set of instructions.
It teaches that God is not just some abstract deity in heaven, but can dwell in physical human space, but only if that space is actively sanctified by human action, by meticulous discipline and intention. Human agency is required to ground the divine presence, providing a framework for transforming the mundane world into a dwelling place for the sacred.
Then we arrive at Leviticus, Vayikra. And this is where modern readers, I think, often get bogged down in the minutiae of ritual and sacrifice. Yet, the sources call it the mechanics of holiness. If we skip it, are we missing the spiritual engine of the blueprint?
Oh, absolutely. It's the theological heart of the Torah. The central command is not a suggestion, it's an imperative. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy.
Okay, but how do you operationalize holiness? How do you make that a verb?
Well, Leviticus provides the answer by bridging the gap between ritual purity and social ethics. The Holiness Code, in Chapter 19, for example, links ritual behavior like dietary laws, laws of sexual morality, directly to social behavior. It famously juxtaposes the prohibition against idolatry with the command to love one's neighbor as yourself.
So the message is clear. The ethical treatment of others is a direct, non-negotiable part of respecting the divine order.
They're two sides of the same coin. You can't separate them.
So, the spiritual health of the community requires both that internal discipline of ritual and the external responsibility of ethics. What happens when the community fails to hold up its end? That brings us to Numbers, Bamidbar, the 40 years in the desert.
And this section is just a profound study in human frailty and group psychology. The sources rightly call this the psychology of transition.
It's a tough read.
It is. The rebellions of Korach, the continuous complaints about the food, the failure of the spies to grasp the potential, all of this demonstrates a profound difficulty of internalizing an ideal. It serves as a stark warning to the learner. Physical liberation from the iron furnace of Egypt does not automatically guarantee spiritual freedom.
The slave mentality.
The slave mentality, the scarcity mindset, the tendency to revert to old habits, it is incredibly persistent and hard to shed, even when you're literally walking with freedom.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale, then, about the gap between receiving a great liberating idea and the painful process of actually living it out over time.
And this whole journey culminates in Deuteronomy, Devarim. This is Moses' final address, and it transforms the text into the constitution of memory. The focus is on consolidation and intentionality. It obsesses over the word Shema.
Which means more than just hear.
Much more. It means to listen, to internalize, and to obey. And most powerfully, it links the collective memory of trauma. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. It links that directly and repeatedly to the imperative of justice.
So trauma then becomes the moral basis for ethics. Because you know what oppression feels like, you are compelled to offer justice to the stranger.
Precisely. It weaponizes empathy. It makes justice for the stranger, the widow, and the orphan not charity, but a mandatory constitutional requirement born out of that communal memory.
Okay, so that is a cosmic blueprint. Now, how do we operationalize this grand architecture in real time in daily life? The technology for that is halakha.
Right. Halakha literally means the way or the path. It's derived from the verb halak, which means to walk. It is the technology for the sanctification of the mundane.
So it takes these huge abstract theological principles like justice or holiness and does what with them?
It codifies them into specific, concrete, daily actions. It transforms theology into an observable practice of character development.
And the central concept driving this character development is imitatio Dei, the imitation of God.
This is where we get the profound practicality. Maimonides, the great medieval philosopher, he takes the abstract biblical command to walk in his ways and interprets it purely practically. He strips away the metaphor.
How so?
He instructs, and this is almost a direct quote, "Just as he is called gracious, you shall be gracious. Just as he is called merciful, you shall be merciful." It's an active striving to embody divine attributes in your character, focusing entirely on interpersonal traits.
So if I'm trying to be gracious in my office interactions, I am literally walking in the ways of the divine. That grounds the concept immediately.
It makes every single interaction a spiritual exercise. Furthermore, the practice often employs this metaphor of the 4 cubits.
Go 4 cubits.
You don't need to fix the entire geopolitical landscape to begin world repair, tikkun olam. You must only sanctify your immediate sphere of influence, your 4 cubits. This means scrutinizing your speech, ensuring integrity in your business dealings, and maintaining patience in your domestic conduct.
It's a deeply powerful, achievable, bottom-up approach. You're not overwhelmed by global problems. You just need to manage the 4 cubits around you today.
Exactly. Start where you are.
The story, of course, continues through the history of Israel and into the prophetic tradition. The prophetic books, the Nevi'im, they show the application and often the spectacular, catastrophic failure of the covenant in history.
That's right. And the prophets themselves, we're talking Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, they didn't just predict the future. That's a common misconception. They acted primarily as the radical moral conscience and social critics of the nation, holding power accountable to the law.
So this prophetic critique is crucial because it sets a kind of radical hierarchy of values that later influenced the entire Western tradition.
Their core message was unwavering. Ethical behavior takes precedence over ritual precision. Isaiah, for instance, delivers this blistering condemnation in chapter 1. He declares that God despises the ritual sacrifices and festivals of those who simultaneously exploit the vulnerable. He asks, "When you stretch out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Your hands are full of blood."
That's a direct intervention into the idea of mechanical religion. You can't just, appease the divine with ceremony if you are unjust in the marketplace.
Exactly. This prophetic consciousness, this fundamental idea that a society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members, is the clear root of Western social justice movements. It's a radical recentering on the human element.
And that focus on internalization and ethics, it sets the stage perfectly for the New Testament. The sources correctly emphasize that we have to first understand it as a first-century Jewish text, emerging from this immense sectarian ferment.
Yes. You can't understand it otherwise. To get the Sermon on the Mount, we have to strip away 2 millennia of separation. Jesus of Nazareth was operating within the diverse world of Second Temple Judaism, which included movements like the Pharisees and Essenes, all of them intensely debating how best to live the Torah.
So the Sermon on the Mount is not a wholesale rejection of the Torah.
Not at all. It's better understood as a midrashic intensification of the holiness code we just found in Leviticus 19.
An intensification. So it's not overturning the law, but demanding a deeper, more rigorous application of it.
Look at the rhetorical formula that's used, the antitheses. "You have heard it said, but I say to you." The sources confirm this was a standard rabbinic rhetorical formula. It was used to push the listener beyond the letter of the law to the radical intention behind it.
Let's focus on that internal shift. The external prohibition is do not murder, but the internal intensification
is do not harbor anger toward your brother. The law moves from regulating action to policing the internal state. It's about purifying the heart, recognizing that murder begins with a thought, with unaddressed resentment.
And the same applies to other areas.
Right. The prohibition against adultery is intensified to a warning against lustful intent. The focus shifts entirely to aligning the internal demands of the covenant with the individual's inner life.
This shift toward internalization also, I think, helps clarify the massive historical confusion surrounding the figure of Paul.
It does. Modern scholarship, what's called the new perspective on Paul, really reevaluates his role. He wasn't necessarily the founder of a new religion rejecting Jewish practice entirely. He was a Jewish thinker grappling with this massive influx of non-Jews, of Gentiles, who wanted to join the covenant family of Abraham.
So what was he fighting against when he spoke against the works of the law? Because that's a very famous phrase.
His polemics were likely not against good deeds or ethical Torah observance in general. They were targeted at the specific boundary markers, like mandatory circumcision for men or strict dietary laws that were being used to exclude non-Jews from the covenant family.
So his mission was more about inclusion.
It was about grafting the nations into Abraham's family without requiring them to become ethnically or legally Jewish.
That recontextualizes the whole mission as one of radical theological inclusivity and expansion. And this leads directly to the practical ethics of this tradition.
Yes, the ethics of the kingdom are radical. We should highlight two technologies here. First, radical forgiveness. The Lord's Prayer makes forgiveness a mandatory conditional mechanism. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us.
The implication being that the blockage is internal. If you hold on to resentment, you're the one who is cutting yourself off.
It's a self-inflicted wound. Forgiveness is framed not as some warm, fuzzy feeling you wait for, but as a spiritual mechanism, an act of the will, that you perform to cleanse the self. Holding on to the debt owed by others is spiritually debilitating. You cleanse the self by cleaning the slate of others.
And the second application is active compassion, often exemplified by the Good Samaritan.
Right. This operationalizes the golden rule. The Torah commands loving your neighbor, but who exactly is the neighbor? The Good Samaritan narrative defines your neighbor not by tribal affiliation or religion or social class,
But by proximity and need.
by proximity and need. It demands a mandatory suspension of social biases to provide aid to the person physically in need in front of you.
This is tough. It asks the learner to overcome instinctive tribalism and immediately define one's sphere of responsibility by the presence of suffering.
Absolutely. It is the immediate ethical application of those covenantal principles.
So moving to the third great Abrahamic branch, Islam, we encounter the Quran, the final recitation. And the whole structure seems to be dominated by Tawhid.
Yes, the absolute uncompromising oneness of God. Tawhid is the foundation. It means that God is one, unique, indivisible, and peerless. This concept has profound implications for human action. Since God is one, the human aspiration should be toward unity, integrity, and rejecting fragmentation, which is seen as a form of spiritual idolatry.
The sources mention the Quran uses the narratives of the Bani Israel, the children of Israel, as a moral mirror for the Ummah, the Muslim community. How does that reflective process work?
Well, the Quran retells the stories of the prophets, Musa, Moses, David, Solomon, but it frequently focuses on the failures of the people they led.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. The story of the golden calf or the Israelites demanding to see God physically, these are cited repeatedly. They aren't just historical notes. They are profound warnings against ingratitude, kufr, and arrogance.
So the community is supposed to look at the past and self-correct.
Precisely. And conversely, the great prophets are exalted as paragons of sabr or patient perseverance and submission. They provide models for ethical endurance and steadfastness.
So if the Quran is the recited revelation, the prophet's life is the operational manual. Where do we find that manual?
That's found in the Sunnah, which is the prophet's practice, preserved in hadith, sayings, and seerah biography. The details of the prophet's life, his forgiveness of the Meccans after their initial hostility, his renowned domestic humility, his specific rules for engagement in war and peace. All of this transforms abstract ethics into concrete, imitable behavior for the community.
Let's look at the practical application then, the rhythm of submission.
Islam offers a really rigorous, stabilizing structure through the Salah, the 5 daily prayers. These are not optional activities, they are temporal anchors.
Temporal anchors, I like that.
They intentionally interrupt the flow of economic activity, technological obsession, and social life 5 times a day to force the believer to physically and mentally reorient toward the divine.
That sounds like a mandatory spiritual timeout, a forced reset button.
It's a profound practice of mindfulness, submission, and humility. The physical movements, the standing, the bowing, the prostration, they reset your perspective. They prevent the ego from taking over completely and keep life tethered to a larger purpose.
And then there's adab, the etiquette, which sounds highly relevant to the chaos of modern digital communication.
It is shockingly relevant. It's an ancient guide to modern emotional intelligence and social friction reduction. The Quran and Sunnah provide specific life instructions that function as spiritual disciplines. Lower your voice, restrain anger, verify news before spreading it.
These are direct guidelines for conflict resolution, for emotional self-regulation, and I guess responsible media consumption today.
Absolutely. They're all designed to ensure social harmony and internal peace.
Okay, we're going to transition now, making a major shift in philosophical gravity. We're moving east into the Dharmic traditions of India and East Asia. Here, the vocabulary shifts dramatically. We leave words like covenant, law, and redemption for reality, illusion, and liberation.
And we contrast the Abrahamic linear view of history with the cyclical view of samsara, the endless loop of birth, death, and rebirth driven by karma. The goal is no longer a relationship with the sovereign God, but moksha, liberation in Hinduism, or nirvana, the cessation of suffering in Buddhism.
So liberation is a state of being free from suffering, from ignorance, and from the ego-driven desires that keep that cycle going.
Exactly. And the philosophical backbone of this liberation really starts with the Upanishads. These represent a profound distillation of the older Vedic ritualism into intense philosophical inquiry. This is the birthplace of the metaphysics of oneness.
The central realization is summarized in the Mahavakya, the great saying, Tattvamasi.
Thou art that. This is the foundational identification that defines the core concept of Brahman and Atman.
Right, so Brahman being the ultimate, infinite, formless reality, the ground of all being.
And Atman being the individual self or soul. The highest realization, the one that frees you from the cycle of suffering, is the non-dual understanding that Atman and Brahman are ultimately one and the same. This is the key insight. It dissolves the illusion of separateness and frees one from that frantic pursuit of empty, material goals driven by the belief in isolation.
This concept is so abstract that it almost requires analogy to grasp. The sources use two powerful ones, the ocean and the wave, and the jar.
The ocean and the wave perfectly illustrates this non-dual reality. The wave has a name and a form. It seems separate, driven by wind and ego, but its substance is entirely water. It arises from the ocean and returns to it, never actually being separate from it.
The appearance of separateness is temporary.
Completely temporary. And the jar analogy makes the role of the ego painfully clear.
How does that one work?
It compares the Atman, the soul, to the space inside a sealed jar. That interior space is identical to the vast encompassing space outside, which is Brahman. The only thing separating them is the fragile clay of the jar, which represents the body, the ego, and the mind's limiting constructs. When the jar breaks through enlightenment or death, the spaces are revealed to have always been one.
So the Upanishads provide the metaphysical map, but the Bhagavad Gita gives us the practical, ethical synthesis for navigating the moral battlefield of life.
Yes, the Gita is a dialogue set on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, between the warrior Arjuna, who is just paralyzed by the ethical dilemma of fighting his own kin, and Lord Krishna, who acts as his charioteer and spiritual mentor. The whole setup represents the inevitable inner struggle of life.
And Krishna synthesizes the various paths, or yogas, to reach the divine. Let's clarify the three primary yogas briefly for the listener.
Okay, so you have Jnana Yoga, which is the path of intellectual discrimination, separating the real from the illusory. Then there's Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion and emotional surrender to a personal God. But for the busy modern person, the most universally applicable is Karma Yoga.
The path of selfless action performed without attachment. This seems like the core teaching that acts as a direct intervention against modern burnout, which is driven entirely by attachment to results.
It is. The key teaching is in chapter 2, verse 47, which is profound and very difficult. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action.
Now wait, that's a tough one. If you are not entitled to the fruits of action, isn't that just a recipe for indifference? Why should I strive for excellence if I don't care about the outcome?
That's the crucial distinction. It's detachment, not indifference. You must still strive for excellence, for skill in action, because the action itself is the offering. The detachment is from the outcome, which is beyond your control. Praise, success, failure, criticism, all outside your control.
And stress, anxiety, burnout, they all arise from trying to control things outside your 4 cubits.
Exactly. Karma Yoga teaches you to focus entirely on the quality and integrity of the process, liberating your inner peace from external validation. You act because it is right, not because you expect a reward.
That clarifies the technology. The action is the ritual. The quality of the action is the discipline.
You're performing your duty perfectly, not for yourself, but as a sacrifice to the flow of reality.
Okay, moving to Buddhism, laid out in the Tripitaka. This tradition approaches liberation by focusing with laser-like precision on the anatomy of suffering, dukkha.
Right. The Tripitaka, or three baskets, is composed of rules, Vinaya, discourses, sutta, and the crucial Abhidhamma Pitaka, the higher teaching. While the suttas use conventional language like self, the Abhidhamma analyzes reality in ultimate, almost scientific terms.
The sources describe the Abhidhamma as the periodic table of consciousness. That sounds extremely technical. How does it deconstruct the self?
It deconstructs all phenomenal existence, the body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, into fleeting momentary events. It claims there are only three categories: citta, momentary consciousness; satasika, mental factors that arise with consciousness like hunger or desire; and rupa, matter. These momentary bundles arise and pass away instantly.
So if I have a thought, there is no fixed, continuous thinker behind it, only the flow of thought moments.
That is the core insight of anatta, or no self. There is no persistent ego entity to grasp onto. Suffering, dukkha, arises precisely when we try to cling to these fleeting moments, to pleasure, to permanence, to identity, as if they were fixed and real. The Abhidhamma provides this granular map of the mind, identifying wholesome and unwholesome states. It functions as an ancient, systematic manual for cognitive behavioral therapy by showing you where to intercept the suffering-creating process.
And the practical outcome of this deconstruction is the powerful technology of mindfulness.
Yes. The power comes from anchoring the mind in the present reality, in the flow of those momentary events. The anecdote of Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh's washing the dishes illustrates this perfectly. Most people wash dishes to get them done. They're focusing entirely on the future, the clean kitchen, the cup of tea.
Missing the present moment completely.
Completely. They are mentally unliving the act of washing. Mindfulness instructs you to wash dishes, to be fully present with the water, the soap, the sound of the bowl. The powerful warning is that if you can't be present while washing the dishes, you won't be present while drinking the tea. Life just slips away in the anxious striving for the next moment.
Finally, we move to East Asia and the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu's manual for aligning with the Tao the Way. This parallels the Hebrew Derek and the Indian Dharma, but it emphasizes nature, simplicity, and spontaneity over rigid law.
The core concept here is Wu Wei, which is radically counterintuitive to the high-striving modern professional. It's often mistranslated as do nothing or passivity.
Right, like being lazy.
But a better understanding is non-forcing, or acting without striving against the natural flow. It's the art of sailing with the current rather than fighting it. It promotes simplicity and non-interference.
Why is this considered an effective technology for living? Doesn't productivity require striving?
Striving often leads to friction, exhaustion, and unintended consequences. Wu Wei seeks maximum efficiency with minimal effort by aligning one's actions with the existing rhythms of nature or an organization. And the Taoist role model for this efficient action is water.
The water metaphor is key here.
Water is the supreme symbol because it demonstrates humility. It seeks the lowest, humblest places that humans reject. It is yielding, yet it overcomes the hard, rigid rock through persistence. And most importantly, it is utterly adaptable, taking the shape of whatever container it is in.
So the application Be Like Water is a powerful strategy for conflict resolution and flow management.
Absolutely. In conflict or negotiation or business management, the Taoist approach is not to meet aggression or a rigid obstacle with equal rigid resistance, which is guaranteed to break you. Instead, you yield, you flow around the obstacle, you look for the path of least resistance, and eventually, by persistent soft action, you erode the obstacle or integrate it into the flow.
So we've established the external laws and ethical structures and the psychological maps. Now we pivot to the inner core, the esoteric streams. This section moves from outward law and observable action to the inner goal of merging with the absolute.
These traditions are really the engine rooms of the technologies we've discussed. They provide these intricate maps and rigorous, often extreme techniques for navigating the inner landscape, dedicated to the possibility of a direct personal experience of union. We can start with the mystical core of Judaism, Kabbalah.
Kabbalah. So it explores the mechanics of how the infinite, the Ein Sof, interacts with and sustains the finite world we inhabit.
It does this primarily through the Sephirot, which are 10 attributes or channels through which the divine light flows. They're not deities, but modes of divine manifestation, arranged in the tree of life. And the 3 columns represent 3 fundamental energies: kindness or expansion, cheesed; judgment or restriction, kivura, and the harmonizing middle path, tefra.
How does this cosmic map translate into personal, actionable psychology for the learner?
Chabad Hasidism, drawing heavily on Kabbalah, maps the Sephirot directly onto the human soul for emotional and intellectual regulation. You can think of them as a set of psychological sliders or EQ controls.
Okay, an EQ control panel.
Exactly. You have the purely intellectual forces. Chochma, the flash of pure, unformed intuition, and Bina, the detailed processing and understanding of that intuition. These then lead to Dat, which is emotional integration.
And then come the emotional outputs from that process.
The main emotional outputs are cheesed, the impulse to give, to expand, to love unconditionally, and Gevura, the impulse to restrict, to discipline, to judge justly. The psychological work is to ensure that cheese and Gevura are perfectly balanced by Tiferet, harmony, preventing love from becoming naive and discipline from becoming cruel.
And the practice born from this mapping is Musa.
Specifically, Cheshbon Henefesh, the accounting of the soul. It's a systematic spiritual discipline, not just, general good feelings, but a clinical daily practice of self-monitoring. You keep a journal tracking specific soul traits or midat, like humility, patience, or truthfulness.
How do you track something like humility? Isn't the very act of tracking it a form of pride?
That's the tension. You don't track it to congratulate yourself, you track the failures. If you were impatient in traffic, you note it clinically. Impatience flared at 8:15 a.m. during interaction X. Rectification required. Focus on silence tomorrow. It ensures that the mystical insights translate into measurable, better interpersonal behavior.
Moving to the mystical heart of Islam, we find Sufism epitomized by the poetry of Rumi.
Sufism is dedicated to the annihilation of the limited ego, fauna, in the ocean of the beloved God, followed by a rebirth. Rumi's genius makes this difficult process accessible through powerful, emotionally resonant metaphors. The reed flute is perhaps the most famous.
Tell us the metaphor again.
The reed flute, the ney, sings this mournful song because it was cut from the reed bed, the divine source, and it longs to return. The holes in the flute represent the intentional emptying of the ego. The sadness is the pain of separation, but the emptying allows the breath of the divine to flow through and make music. You must be empty to be filled.
And the chickpea story offers a profound theodicy, a way of understanding suffering.
It's a key piece of spiritual resilience technology. A chickpea is boiling in a pot and begins to panic, trying to jump out of the heat. The cook pushes it back down, explaining, "I'm not boiling you to torture you, but to give you flavor so you can become food and unite with the human spirit."
So suffering is the necessary boiling that removes the bitterness.
And matures the soul, makes it palatable for union. It reframes pain as intentional maturation.
So how do Sufis actively manage the pain of separation and worldly distractions?
Through dhikr, or remembrance, this is the rhythmic, repetitive recitation of God's names or phrases like La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. The goal is to polish the mirror of the heart, removing the rust of worldly distractions, or ghafla. And modern cognitive science validates this. Rhythmic breathing and chanting are highly effective, stress-reducing grounding techniques that quiet the prefrontal cortex and stabilize emotional states.
We find a very similar meditative discipline in Christian mysticism, particularly in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, preserved in the Philokalia.
The Philokalia, which means love of the beautiful, is this massive anthology focusing on the purification of the mind and the prayer of the heart, aiming for theosis, or union with the divine nature. The central practice is called nipsis.
Nipsis watchfulness. That sounds like intense psychological self-scrutiny.
It is. The practitioner stands guard at the door of the heart, inspecting every logismoi, every intrusive thought, urge, or temptation before it can take root and turn into action. It's a preemptive defense against unwholesome thoughts.
And the tool used to achieve this inner stillness is the Jesus prayer.
Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Its brilliance lies in its brevity and its power.
Absolutely. The application for lay people is to sync this short prayer with the rhythm of the breath. It acts as an anchor, physically and mentally, preventing the mind from wandering into paralyzing past regrets or debilitating future anxieties. It creates an inner cell of silence, a portable sanctuary that one carries into the marketplace.
Finally, we turn to the systematic, highly technical manual for the mind that predates modern psychology, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras.
These sutras are the classical formulation of Raja Yoga. They're often compared to an ancient scientific text because they clinically define the problem, the goal, and the technique. The entire purpose is encapsulated in the second sutra, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha.
That's the core science. Yoga is the cessation, nirodha, of the fluctuations vritti of the mind stuff, chitta. It's an instruction set.
It really is. The mind is likened to a turbulent lake, pitta. The waves, vritti, on the surface are thoughts, emotions, memories, and they hide the bottom, which is the true self, or purusha. When the waves are stilled, the water becomes clear, and the true nature of the self is revealed. The goal is to stop the mind from generating its own suffering.
How does the learner apply this cessation technique in daily life? It sounds like something you need a cave for.
Not at all. The primary exercise is learning to become the sakshi, the witness. When a strong thought or emotion arises, fear, anger, planning, lust, you do not identify with it. You don't say, I am angry. You note it objectively. Anger is arising.
And that seemingly simple linguistic shift is profound.
Because it creates a crucial gap between the stimulus and the response.
That gap, that pause, is the space of freedom.
It is the ultimate goal of psychological self-control. You realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness observing them. The detachment immediately reduces the power the vrittis have to create anxiety and compulsive action.
We've covered concepts spanning millennia. For the modern learner, especially one steeped in critical thinking, the historical and textual fidelity of these documents is a critical question. Can we trust that the texts we read today are the same ones that held this power thousands of years ago?
This is where we bring in the material evidence. For the Hebrew Bible, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls starting in 1947 was revolutionary.
Okay.
Because it offered the opportunity to test textual integrity after centuries of oral and scribal transmission.
Right. Before the DSS, our oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts were the medieval Masoretic texts dating from the 10th century CE. The scrolls suddenly gave us copies dating back to the Second Temple period.
We're talking about bridging a textual gap of over 1,000 years. Crucially, the discovery included the Great Isaiah Scroll, or 1 Kuisa, dating to approximately 125 BCE. The comparison was the ultimate stress test for the reliability of the transmission process.
And what was the scholarly verdict when the scrolls were compared to the later texts?
The fidelity was astonishing. Scholarly comparison shows approximately 95% identity. The variations were overwhelmingly minor. Differences in spelling or orthography, occasional word order shifts, or small conjunctions like and.
Minor scribal errors, essentially.
For example, the sources detail that in a famous messianic passage, Isaiah 53.1, the scroll includes the word light, which is absent in the later Masoretic text. But the theological substance, the core message, and the technology, it remains entirely intact.
The implication for the listener is powerful then. The core spiritual instruction and the cosmology being discussed are grounded in historical reality. The text being read and internalized today is materially the same as that read and studied during the time of Jesus and the early rabbis.
It validates the painstaking reliability of the scribal tradition.
But the text never stood alone. The written law, the Torah, is intentionally cryptic. It says, bind them for a sign upon your hand, but offers no technical specification on what to bind or how.
That's the entire rationale for the oral tradition. The oral law, later codified in the Mishnah and Gemara, which make up the Talmud, provides the necessary detail and implementation instructions. However, the true technological genius of the Talmud is its methodology. It's not monolithic dogma. It is a record of intergenerational debate, or machloket.
Why preserve the debate? Why not just declare the single correct answer?
Because the methodology itself is a core technology. The Talmud meticulously preserves minority opinions, even those legally rejected, teaching the truth is often found in the clash of diverse, critically analyzed perspectives. Rigorous questioning, skepticism, and intellectual debate are not viewed as challenging the tradition, but as a form of worship. It trains the mind to think critically and complexly.
That reframes the religious education process entirely. It's an epistemology of debate.
Then you have the Midrash. If the Talmud is the technical application of the law, Midrash is the imagination of the law. It fills the narrative gaps and explores the ethics behind the stories.
Give us another example besides the humble Mount Sinai story.
A classic Midrash addresses the moment after Cain kills Abel. When God asks Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain infamously replies, "Am I my brother's keeper?"
The Midrash asks, why did God bother asking a question he already knew the answer to?
Right, he's omniscient.
And it concludes, God asked to give Cain a chance to repent. The Midrash is a technology that explores divine mercy, seeking to uncover the ethical lesson hidden in the silence of the text.
Finally, we need to acknowledge the texts that acted as bridges between these traditions, the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha.
Books like the Wisdom of Solomon and the Book of Enoch were foundational to the theological landscape of the first century. The Wisdom of Solomon, which was influenced by Greek philosophy, explicitly introduces concepts that were less explicit in the early Hebrew Bible, such as the immortality of the soul.
And its personification of wisdom. Crucially, yes, it personifies wisdom, or Sophia, as a creative, sustaining, divine agent that proceeds from God. This concept was instrumental in foreshadowing the Christian Logos theology, the idea that Christ is the active, creative Word of God. These hidden books show the complex, dynamic evolution of religious thought into its later rabbinic and Christian forms.
So we've journeyed through 5 millennia of wisdom, crossing continents, from the linear cosmology of the Abrahamic traditions to the cyclical non-dualism of the Dharmic traditions. The goal was to find a synthesis. What is the startling convergence that ties all these highly technical technologies together?
Well, despite the profound theological differences, monotheism versus non-dualism, law versus flow, the functional application points to a unified protocol for human flourishing. They all agree that human suffering is optional, that it's rooted in misidentification, and that the method for liberation is always through disciplined, ethical, self-aware action.
Let's define this unified protocol, starting with the shared diagnosis of the human problem.
The diagnosis is remarkably consistent across the board. The human condition is characterized by separation, fragmentation, and suffering. This manifests as exile from the divine presence in Judaism, dukkha, or suffering rooted in clinging in Buddhism, or ghafla, that worldly distraction or heedlessness in Islam.
The mind is inherently chaotic.
The mind is inherently chaotic,
Yeah.
Chittavritti, and the ego creates a painful, false sense of isolation, which is perfectly illustrated by that jar analogy in Vedanta.
And the universal goal.
The goal across all traditions is a return to unity and reality. This is redemption, nirvana, tawhid, moksha, theosis. It's the realization of the interconnectedness of all things and the cessation of inner conflict.
Now for the method, the 4-component technology itself.
Okay, first, study. Engaging with the blueprint, whether that's the Torah, the Logos, or the Dharma, to understand the physics and laws of moral reality.
Second,
Discipline. Rigorously restraining the ego and managing impulses through external law, like halakha or sharia, or internal ethics, like the yamas and niyamas. Third, mindfulness prayer. Quieting the mind's incessant chatter through techniques like meditation, sala, or the Jesus prayer to experience the divine presence or the true self.
And finally, the mandatory output, action.
Action. Serving others as a manifestation of the underlying unity. This is cheesed, loving kindness, charity, or karma yoga. All the abstract wisdom is, at the end of the day, useless unless it manifests as tangible, selfless service to the neighbor. As the prophet Isaiah made clear, you can't achieve spiritual health if you are unjust in your actions.
This all leads us to the ultimate pragmatic test, a practical guide for tomorrow. How can the listener integrate this unified protocol into their existing, busy, modern life?
We can structure this around the natural rhythm of the day, using techniques from the different traditions seamlessly to address the specific challenges each part of the day presents.
Okay, let's start with the morning, the foundation. You wake up and immediately the mind starts spinning with the day's to-do list.
The very first moment of consciousness should be anchored in gratitude. As the sources mention the Jewish practice of reciting Moda Ani, just acknowledging consciousness as a gift, this sets the initial tone of acceptance. Immediately follow this with a brief mindfulness practice from the Buddhist or yoga tradition.
Just a few minutes.
Sit for 5 minutes. Practice being the sakshi, the witness. Note the chaotic thoughts without identification. Anxiety about the meeting is arising before letting the mind spiral. This establishes a space of freedom before the day's chaos can even begin.
Next, work and action, the main source of stress and internal friction for most of us.
Here, practice karma yoga. Engage in your prescribed duty with total focus and excellence. You have to perform your task well, but mentally surrender the outcome. Do not allow your self-worth to ride on the praise, criticism, or promotion you may or may not receive.
And at the same time,
Apply Wu Wei from Taoism. When office politics or obstacles arise, be like water. Flow around them without rigid emotional resistance. Seek the simplest, most natural path forward rather than escalating conflict.
what about interactions? Dealing with people, especially the ones that rub us the wrong way. The ethics piece.
This is where you apply the Leviticus Sermon on the Mount ethic. Consciously choose to see the person in front of you, even the annoyance or competitor, as a neighbor to be loved or served. And most importantly, practice radical forgiveness. Don't wait until you feel like forgiving. Decide to forgive.
It's an action, not a feeling.
It's an action. Holding on to resentment is like spiritual poison. Practice dhikr, or the Jesus prayer, to cleanse yourself constantly and keep your spiritual slate clean of the perceived debts of others.
And finally, for the evening, before sleep, how do we reflect and reset?
Before bed, perform Cheshbon Hanafesh from the Musar tradition. Review the day objectively and clinically. Where did the ego flare up? Where was the mind distracted? Where was there gafla? Note the failure not to judge yourself, but to identify the spiritual deficiency for future rectification. Then use a simple centering technique, like the synchronized breath prayer, the Jesus prayer, or dhikr, to settle the mind before sleep. Polish the mirror of the heart so that you wake up clean.
This entire synthesis is a profound challenge to the modern tendency to compartmentalize life. It proposes that every action, from managing conflict at work to washing dishes, can and must be imbued with spiritual purpose if we are to truly flourish.
The final conclusion is that these texts are not relics to be venerated from a distance. They are sophisticated, verified maps for a resilient, compassionate, and deeply meaningful life. They challenge us to understand that while we cannot control the world, we can absolutely control the technological output of our own inner operating system.
So what does this all mean? We've seen that every major tradition agrees that our treatment of others, the golden rule, right action, the imperative of justice, is essential to our own internal well-being. If the source code of the universe confirms this convergence, the question for you, the modern learner, is this. What small, concrete act of kindness, justice, or humility in your own 4 cubits will you commit to today to begin the repair of the world? Tikkun Olam.
The map has been revealed. Now you must walk the path.